Hello and welcome to episode 89 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have some roster mania news after a few weeks away, including a World Championship roster adding one of the best free agents in the world to their team this offseason. We have a full squad wipe in the CDL. We have MW3 being officially confirmed by Activision, and some of the details of the game being revealed or leaked. We have a pretty iconic figure in the COD community scene leaving or doing something else, and we have some other stuff that we'll talk about as we get into the show. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Don't really have anything to tease or joke about, so ready to get this on the road.
Yeah, we've been away for a few weeks. It's been very busy at work at .esports.com, and COD has not been busy other than the MW3 stuff that is just kind of popping up here and there. And, we won't start with that because we'll start at the top with the CDL stuff, but we'll get to the MW3 details later in the show. Let's kick it off with SIB because we've kind of resuming a conversation we had several weeks ago. Maybe this was more than a month ago now, but the report initially was that Priesta, who had broken his negotiations about his contract, had broken down with the Subliners just weeks after winning the World Championship. His contract negotiations broke down, and SIB was reportedly going to replace him. That is officially confirmed as the Subliners announced. I believe this was a week ago now, maybe 2 weeks. I don't even know. Time seems to move differently around here now. But he will officially replace Priesta in the lineup, and that's obviously one of the best rosters in the CDL. It was before SIB and with Priesta, and now SIB comes in from the Seattle Surge, and we both obviously think very, very highly of him. One of the best players in the CDL 2 years ago. I believe he was an all-star. And last year, the Surge weren't a very good team for most of the season, but statistically, he was still very strong. And at the end of the year, he showed that he's still a very, very good player. So what is your reaction to this? Obviously, we did talk about this a few weeks ago, but now that it's officially been confirmed, what do you make of SIB to New York?
Yeah, for the sake of not repeating myself too much, because I don't remember exactly what I have and haven't said on the topic in the past couple weeks, but I'm really excited about the move. It's weird to say that considering like New York just won champs, and usually the team that wins champs isn't really making a change before they even play a game the following year. So it's weird to think that a team could potentially get better, or I mean even worse for just the sake of the argument, because no change means you're staying the same, really. But I do think SIB is obviously a really good player. It's tough to really say, though, just like on paper, if this is a better move for New York or not. You can definitely argue it either way. But like I said, it's really tough to say because they literally won the most tournaments last year with Priesta, and they won champs. So gonna be interesting to see how the squad meshes together. As we've talked about numerous times, there's only so many kills on the map. And while I think SIB is probably a better slayer than Priesta at this point in both of their careers, those glue guys and the guys doing the things around the map that you need to do are equally important, and we talk about that a lot. So gonna be interesting to see how everything works for this new squad, but I'm confident they'll be able to make things work and potentially pick up where they left off. One thing of note, I'm pretty sure I talked about it, but it will be interesting to see who is the sniper for this New York team in Search and Destroy, because we saw SIB mostly do a lot of sniping for Seattle Surge, and we saw really, Kismet, Hydra, and Skies at multiple different points using the sniper. I think Skies probably used it the most, but all of the others have it at one point last season, I know for a fact. Used a sniper here or there. So it will be interesting to see what they decide to do in S&D. see, but I do think, this is if New York had to make a move here, SIB is probably one of the few exceptions to arguably getting an upgrade over Priesta. But again, it's really tough to say either way until we see them in action, because like I said, it's not like this is any team that SIB is joining. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him because he's coming into the most successful team from the past season, and if they don't succeed right away, there'll be questions of whether the move was actually good or not, and all that stuff. So a lot of things I'm going to be looking forward to seeing from this New York squad, but I like the potential, and I think highly of SIB, so I think he's going to perform well. Just going to be a question of, like I said, only so many kills on the map, so is anybody's slaying production going to go down here and there, or just overall, how's the squad going to gel together?
If these players can figure out the slaying part and sacrificing stats for wins, I don't see why they wouldn't be a championship contender from the very beginning of the season. Like you said, there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of slaying power, but we've seen in the past before that doesn't necessarily translate into success in the game and win events, and of course a world championship is the ultimate goal. And for New York, it's going to be very difficult to repeat as world champions, and that's a long-term goal because we're probably a year or so away from the next world championship event. And for New York, they were very good at the beginning of the season. They kind of lagged a bit in the middle, and then they picked it up at the end of the season, with Priesta being the glue guy, as we like to say, someone who is bottom fragging on his team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like he's the worst player, that he's a bad player by any means. But it's going to be really interesting to see how New York is able to fit these pieces together and make a roster that can compete from the very beginning, because it's a very similar situation to SIB's former Seattle Surge teammate Pred in Optic, where there's so much slaying power, there's so much talent on Optic's new roster with Pred and Kenny and Shotzi and Dashy. At the same point, that doesn't, like I just said with New York, that doesn't mean that they're gonna win a championship. They're gonna have to make some sacrifices, each of them probably, and the coaching staff and the players are gonna have to put aside egos or whatever could hold them back. But New York is a great team, and I think a lot of players are probably envious of SIB and in the situation that he's in now, where he's joining a world championship caliber roster. Same thing with Draza. The reason that Draza said he would go to Atlanta FaZe is, they place top 3 every single event. How can you say no to that? And I think SIB is in a very similar situation where he's going to a team that won 3 events this season, including the world championship at the very end. And that's the perfect situation for a lot of players. Kind of a similar situation to Karma joining Complexity in 2013, replacing Clayster. Maybe that's 2014 actually. But like he's joining an incredible roster that has the ceiling is a world championship, and the floor is probably, I would assume top 6. If they were any lower than top 6, then it would be pretty shocking. But I'm really interested to see what happens with New York and how SIB ends up fitting in with this roster. Another roster bit of news, which is kind of a follow-up from almost 2 months ago now. But on June 25th, the Minnesota RØKKR announced that they were not exercising second-year options for Attach, Bance, Cammy, and Afro, which made them unrestricted free agents this offseason. They also, at the time, the RØKKR did, they confirmed that Fame's contract would expire as he would also become an unrestricted free agent. We hadn't heard anything else from the RØKKR in regards to those specific 5 players until today, actually. Minnesota gave their thank you messages to Attach, Bance, Cammy, Afro, and Fame, which would seem to indicate that all 5 players will not be returning to the RØKKR in the next season. What are your thoughts on this? Because we saw it with Attach specifically last season, where his contract was up in the offseason. He was an unrestricted free agent heading in. He ends up, obviously having the contract expire, but re-signing with Minnesota despite reported interest from a few other teams. It doesn't appear that has been the case for Minnesota this year, and it looks like they're heading toward a complete rebuild and a completely new roster. They parted ways with Saint, their head coach and general manager, earlier in the offseason. So what do you think of Minnesota's moves here in parting ways officially with their entire roster?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense in regards to, we saw the report July 25th now from Jacob Hale. They're targeting accuracy, awakening, vivid, and lens. We talked about that on our last show. So it would just make sense organizationally if, they're not able to sell those players or whatnot to any other teams, then they just release them, let them be truly unrestricted free agents. We have heard rumblings of potentially Afro and Cammy going to LAT. So it is a little interesting. They were, completely released now, so there won't have to be necessarily a buyout for LAT if those moves do come to fruition as well. We haven't really heard much about Bance or Attach or Fame. Gotta assume Attach, at least of those three, would most likely find his way onto a team. At the bare minimum, I would probably assume Fame will be back in Challengers, and Bance could potentially find a spot maybe on London, but there's questions around London potentially rebranding. Will they still have a European roster? All that stuff. So, interesting situation for all those players, like you said in the past. Last season when Minnesota didn't make champs and all that stuff, they went for the full rebuild and essentially did release Attach, but ended up bringing him back. So I guess technically, if something changes with that, latest report we had like a month ago now, there could be third time's a charm where they re-sign Attach again and do something with that roster that's slightly different. But yeah, I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. We've talked about it a couple times now too. There's been rumors and reports of Minnesota potentially looking to sell its CDL slot or merge with another company for ownership control of its CDL spots. So a lot of question marks around Minnesota at this point. We're just going to have to sit back and wait until we see what they end up officially doing. My guess would be that, when I heard you say they were releasing these players, that was my initial reaction, was that they're likely like setting up the players to potentially be picked up by other teams. So it's possible that we hear news of some of these players joining other teams relatively soon. And I wouldn't be surprised if we heard news about these players finding new homes potentially before Minnesota confirms its roster for next year. But technically, on the other hand, them officially announcing the departures does clear the way for them to confirm a new roster. So yeah, a lot of waiting around this roster mania, but we'll have to just see what comes, and when we get it, we'll talk about it.
I'd expect Minnesota to announce it not soon or anything, but I don't think that they would part ways with every single one of them and kind of cut ties officially, at least, without having some kind of assurance of what roster they're going to build for the next season. But yeah, it is what it is, I guess, because Minnesota's reported roster doesn't sound incredibly strong, but we saw from last season that Minnesota's roster, which I thought would be very good and many people thought would be pretty strong, turned out not to be the case, and they struggled for most of the season and squeaked into champs, in the last major. And it's, I don't think Minnesota is going to be a real contender. And they weren't going to be a contender with the old roster, so maybe they're looking to just cut costs in the sense that you can get some guys that can compete but are not demanding much more than the minimum is my guess on that. Next, let's talk about Clayster, because you actually brought this to my attention right as we were about to get started, because I had not seen it, but about 2 weeks ago, August 9th, Clayster revealed on a live stream that he was approached by the Las Vegas Legion, and that the coach of the Legion, Theory, formerly of Team Caliber Glory, mostly that's where most people remember him. He was Theory was offering Clayster, according to Clayster, 33% less money, but with the added responsibility, and I'm quoting here from our guy Scott Robertson of DottySports.com. He said, with the added responsibility of taking on the role of the team's partnerships manager, this offer supposedly included the caveat that Clayster could claim 50% of revenue from any partnerships or sponsorships he picked up for the Legion. That's a little bit of business stuff, which obviously we're not a business podcast, but the idea is pretty simple. Less money, more work, and Clayster was not too pleased about it. He said he didn't see the value in taking just 50% of brand deals he could go out and acquire on his own. Quote, if I was going to do that anyways, wouldn't I just get the brand deal for myself and take 100%? Because the brand deal would be sponsoring us because of me and not because of the rest of the team. How do you expect me to get paid 33% less and take on more responsibilities? That's not how the real world works, end quote. Let's get your thoughts on this because you brought it up to me, and I'm kind of processing it in real time. But what do you make of the, I guess, alleged offer? Because I do remember Theory just vaguely tweeting that's not it really how it happened or whatever, something to the effect of that. But allegedly that's what happened according to Clayster. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a lot, I feel like, to unpack here, but at least according to Clayster's side of the story, it's very interesting to hear this type of offer. We've heard, speculation and rumors over the years of Paris and Vegas as an organization, apparently paying close to the minimum, if not the minimum, and a contract offer like this where it would seemingly lower however much Clayster was being paid to try and keep him around would not surprise me at all. But the sponsorships aspect of it is really a little mind blowing to me because like Clayster said in his quote, a lot of you just got to assume that almost any sponsorship he would bring to the table, they would be essentially sponsoring Clayster. And even if they were sponsoring, quote unquote, the Vegas Legion, it would be because of Clayster and, the brand that he brings to the table. So if he was going to get less salary to do those brand deals, more work to try and get brand deals and only get 50% of those brand deals, as opposed to getting whatever his salary would be and then 100% of the brand deals, he still wouldn't be making as much money as he potentially could. So it's definitely a weird situation. It like I said, doesn't surprise me that Vegas is potentially trying to keep Clayster by slightly paying him less, but it does sound from that clip that if unless something changes with that offer, that Clayster might be looking to go elsewhere this off season, which a little disappointing to me. I feel like like we've talked about now, like the breaking point fan analysis and all that stuff. It seemed like a lot of people were buying into the Vegas hype train towards the end of the season and all that stuff, and obviously Clayster was a huge part of that. So you would assume that Vegas, if they're truly trying to grow a brand and all that stuff, that they would try to keep around essentially the face of the franchise. From fan perspective, you could argue Temp might be the face of the franchise from purely playing perspective, but Clayster definitely has more fans and a bigger brand personally. So definitely a very interesting situation. I think Clay even said, I don't know if we quoted it, but I could be wrong here. Yeah, he's at the end. Clayster also noted that he would have been willing to return to the team in 2024 for the same amount of money as his 2023 deal. So not even, looking for a raise technically. And, obviously it sounded like across the board. We've talked about LAT on earlier shows. Like it sounds like, some of these orgs are trying to cut costs. So maybe even keeping Clayster on the same salary, whatever that number was, just wasn't an option for Vegas. But even if they went a little lower, maybe Clay still would have been able to stick around. I don't really know. That's pure speculation. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think the biggest takeaways from this, development is that it just seems like we most likely will not see Clayster back in a Vegas Legion uniform unless another offer is made, or a drastic change is made to the current offer from the organization.
I want to quote Theory here, and I just like an idiot clicked out of it and don't know where to find it. All right, Theory. He quote tweeted Jacob Hale's tweet about the Legion offering Clay 33% salary reduction, allegedly. Theory quote tweeted that, said, "I wouldn't say that's exactly how the conversation went, but y'all have the time of your life." Then he followed up and said, "Just because people are interested doesn't mean I'm going to share my personal conversation with someone. I don't have a stream or agenda to push by setting the record straight, so I'll leave it where it is. Also want to say I have a ton of respect for Clay and no bad blood there. No bad blood here." I hate that. Like, just come out and say what you want to say. Don't vaguely tweet about it. Like, and I'm not defending Clay. If Clay said something that's inaccurate, feel free to come out and say that's inaccurate. That's not how it happened. That's not what we offered you. I want that to be public, but don't say, I wouldn't say that's how it happened and then be like, well, I'm not going to confirm it, or I'm not going to give any proof behind it. To me, that's just like, there's no value in it. There's no, like, we don't really get anything out of it. And I think a lot of people gave Theory grief for it because he didn't really give any details about what was allegedly being offered by the Legion. As to what Clay was apparently offered, a 33% salary reduction. I would imagine that they reduced it, or they were hoping to reduce it down to the minimum, is just my guess on the matter, or close to it. You don't think so? I would
not for Clay.
I would be shocked to, like, a 30, even if it went down to the minimum, that meant that Clay was making over 70 to possibly up to $80,000 last year in salary from the Legion.
33% of 150 is 50.
Yeah.
Actually, no. So that only lowers it to 100,000.
I'm just saying, if what they're offering now is a minimum, then 33% more than that would be about 75,000.
And so 90,000, 33% of 90,000 is 30,000. You minus 30,000 from 90, that's 60,000. That's close to the minimum.
And that'd be shocking. Like, if I heard Clay was making $90,000 last season for the Legion, I think that's, like, not that Clayster is not deserving of it or anything. I'm shocked that the Legion would offer it, because we had this conversation about temp, and I forget what the exact figures were, but he had said that he took less money. So, like, he would have got paid more to be on the LA Thieves bench in 2021 than he made as a starter for then the Paris Legion. So he took a pay cut to play in the CDL, and he said he regretted it, essentially, because people looked at him like he wasn't as good just because he decided he wanted to get paid. And I'm just saying, and I bring that up just to say that it's surprising to me that Vegas might have been offering more than the minimum, or much more than the minimum, to have these players on their roster. But I fully agree that Clayster is worth more than the minimum, just from a brand perspective, not necessarily from gameplay, because, we've talked about it before. There's no way that a Call of Duty player, maybe other than Scump, can really bring in any kind of big revenue just from, like, being on a team to, like, make up for, like, $100,000, $200,000 roster. Like, they're not going to bring in that value for an organization most of the time, if I had to bet. But Clayster, as we saw with the Breaking Point fan share thing, there are a lot of people that could not care less about the Paris Legion, did not care about the Vegas Legion until Clayster signed to the Vegas Legion. And then it became, oh, I want to support them, even if I'm not gonna, they're not my main team. They're not like the only team I root for. But if Vegas is facing Minnesota, I'm gonna root for Vegas. If Vegas is against Seattle, I'm gonna root for Vegas. And I think that's where Clayster's value is apparent for the Legion. In the partnerships thing, I think the idea of a player having a side gig, or essentially having like an office job that can help subsidize income, I think that's just the nature of competitive Call of Duty at the moment. There's the money that we saw in 2019 and 2020 and even before then, that money is not there anymore. A lot of these organizations are cutting back costs. They don't want to pay as much for salary for these players, for the teams as a whole. They're not going to be supported financially the way they were in the past. And if Clayster can make more money by doing something else outside of just playing the game, I think he would take that. But again, 33% decrease. And then they're saying, well, the sponsorships you get, you're only going to get half of that, when, like you said, most of those sponsorships, if not all of those sponsorships, will come from, well, we want to sponsor Clayster's team. We don't necessarily want to sponsor this team like specifically. We just want Clayster to kind of be the face of our brand and to do things like that, which, just makes this a very muddy situation. And it's pretty interesting because we usually don't get this much detail about what the contract negotiations are like between some of these organizations and these players. And definitely it's not very often that you see a player be offered to do this extra thing, to be the partnerships manager for the team. Although, what was it, Saints with Midnight Esports, he was graphic design is his passion that one time, and he had to make his own like welcome graphic in, what was that, 2018. So like,
I don't remember that.
there was but there haven't been a lot of instances of that, and I don't think we're going to see very many in the near future. Like you said, it doesn't appear that Clayster will be back with the Legion, unless something big changes, or this was all just a big misunderstanding and they can clear the air. But it would suck to see Clay not be in the CDL for the upcoming season, which we've heard a lot of the rosters that have been confirmed or have been reported about. Minnesota reportedly has a roster. Seattle, we'll get to it. They're targeting a roster. LAG, who knows? It seems like LAG and Seattle might be competing. LAT has a roster reportedly in mind. So there's a lot of teams making moves already, or trying to construct teams, lineups, and Clayster might not be a part of that. So that's really the biggest takeaway, I think, for me, as far as this news goes.
I will say just real quick on that, I would be very surprised, even though it was on Vegas, if Clayster was under $100,000 last year salary wise. Just knowing the type of player he is and what he brings to the table, like I feel like an agent for Clayster just wouldn't allow him to sign a contract for lower than that. But there really isn't much basis to that, and we don't know the actual numbers and stuff, so that's just a gut instinct. But I wouldn't be surprised if Vegas did, quote unquote, splurge a little bit on Clayster and then had the other three players close to the minimum. But that might not all matter, and we'll just have to see how the new contract situation plays out this year. Because, like you said, I think that is the bigger concern. If Clay doesn't end up on Vegas, that really leaves LAG and London. Because we have confirmation of Atlanta, Boston, New York, Optic, and Toronto. LAT, Minnesota, and Florida are reported. Might be a possibility for Seattle. So then that just leaves LAG, Vegas, and London.
Yeah, and we don't really know what's going to happen with some of these teams. It seems that some of these teams are competing, like I said, for the same players. I know that we should probably just finish up with the Rostermania talk with Seattle, and the report that came from Jacob Hale. almost 2 weeks ago now. Of course, everything happens like the day after we do a podcast, which is just tradition. But Jacob Hale reported that the Surge were looking to sign Illy Hook, Arcides, and challenger prospect Abuza, who I believe is French, or maybe Belgian. One of those. I think he's French speaking. I'll just say it like that. But the Surge were looking at Illy Hook, Arcides, and Abuza, which would be an interesting roster. Of course, Hook and Arcides played together on LAG briefly. Illy and Hook have history, obviously, world champion teammates as part of the Dallas Empire. Illy and Arcides, I don't know if they've ever... I don't think they've teamed before. I don't think so, but but they're obviously, I think they were originally linked to LAG, if I'm not mistaken, earlier in the offseason. They were reportedly a team of 2 at some point. And then Abuza, obviously a challenger's prospect. What do you make of that roster? Obviously, this is more of a preliminary report, not necessarily Seattle is signing these guys, but they're looking to sign them. They're targeting them. So Seattle, Illy, Hook, RC's Abuza, what does that roster do for you personally?
It's exciting that Abuza could potentially be in the CDL. That seems like, before we had the report of Linz potentially signing with Minnesota, it seemed like the most talked about challenger who could potentially come up for 2024 would be Abuza. So if he gets a shot here, that is exciting. However, the roles for this team, I know that was the initial reaction myself and a lot of people in the community seemingly, without personally knowing much about Abuza and his playstyle. I feel like I've heard more that he's more of a main AR player. And obviously with someone like Arcides on the team, that would mean they'd have 2 main ARs. And then even with the other 2 players on the team, Illy and Hook, Illy's more of a flex and Hook is your SMG. So Hook is really the only true main SMG on the team. You could say, maybe Abuza plays flex and Illy goes to second sub. That is a little weird in my opinion too. But it seemed like, according to Jacob Hale's report, I'm trying to find it here. Yeah, sources have stated that Abuza is likely to be using a submachine gun to start the year. So I don't know how that would play out, if we would really get to see the full potential of Abuza, if he really is just a really good AR and he's forced to use a sub, or maybe he's just a really talented player and he's able to pick up the sub like no problem. And then that would kind of be like a Kenny situation in my eyes, just because I feel like we heard so much, so many people were so excited when Kenny in World War II made his return to COD, and he was just dominating with the PPSH, but even he has said on multiple occasions he preferred the AR. In AW, when he was first making his come up, he really liked the BAL. And then when he just joined Team Caliber in his return, they had Accuracy and Chino on that team, or Cheen, I should say. And in that game, the FG and the bar were good for ARs, but you still needed a strong PPSH. And then Theory, after just talking to him, Theory was still playing back then. He was the other SMG, but he notably had some lackluster KDs in events where they even won. So TK really needed another star SMG, and it just worked out for Kenny in that sense. So I guess, best case scenario for Seattle is if Abuza is just that talented, he could maybe slide in and have a season like Kenny did in his rookie year. But I think that's the best case scenario, and that's what you hope happens. What actually turns out to be the case is a different story, but we'll have to see. I've heard good things about him. I don't know much about him, so I don't know what that would, how difficult it would be for his playstyle to adjust to an SMG full-time over and a full-time AR. We'll have to see. Could even turn out that, MW3 is a 3 AR game, and then Seattle could potentially be looking really good with Arcides, Illy, and Abuza all on ARs, and Hook is the one SMG. I mean, that would probably be the best case scenario for them from a role standpoint if the meta played out that way too. So we'll have to see.
Abuza's probably he's definitely one of the more anticipated challengers prospects in the past few years. I know Scrappy was definitely highly anticipated after last year. Hydra, of course, several years ago now, but Abuza with the French speaking team, I never know how to say it. Awaba Bobs is just how I'm going to say it. But they were one of the best challengers teams all year long, and people were hyping him up constantly. Obviously, we're not very knowledgeable of challengers. We kind of just hear names, and as they get into the CDL or are being talked about, we learn more about them. But I do think it's interesting, and it's worth to note that, of course, I did look it up. Abuza is Belgian, but he speaks French, as many Belgians do. And of course, Rambo Ray, French Canadian. He could help kind of bridge any language gap that there could be. And I would imagine the culture shock of moving to America and playing for the Seattle Surge with, I want to say they're Americans because Ilya is Canadian, and I believe Hook was born in Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken. But the idea is that these players have been like kind of ingrained into American COD, and they've gotten to know each other. And Rambo has a connection with Illy and Hook. Hook was, of course, part of the Dallas Empire roster, and then briefly a part of the Optic Texas roster. I'm not sure how much crossover there was this past season with Rambo kind of getting out the door and Hook coming in the door, but they did have the connection, of course, from the Dallas Empire, the championship team. Same thing with Illy. And Illy was kind of pushed out of the starting roster right around the same time that Rambo was pushed out of the coaching slot and ended up departing from Optic. And I'm not sure if there's any connection between RCDs and Rambo, aside from just, RCDs has competed against Rambo's teams for several years now. But I do think it's interesting, and it's probably worth noting that Rambo could be kind of the connector with this team. And there's a ton of talent that's undeniable. I would love to see Hook kind of reclaim what people thought he would be, as going back to that infamous nade shot tweet from a few years ago that Hook is like a superstar, and he's if you have a player, if you can get a player like Hook, you always do it. I would love to see him kind of get back to that level, because it's been a rough few years in terms of him bouncing around and being used as the scapegoat for a few of these teams that he's been on. And Illy as well, because I would have never guessed that Illy would have been pushed out of Optic with how much success he had with the Empire, and how much even success they had not this past season, but last season before his hand injury, which pretty much derailed their season and really screwed up things for the rest of the year. But that's about it for roster mania stuff. Let's move on to some general COD stuff, including MW3 officially was confirmed will be releasing this November, and some of the things that have come out about the game. That 16 classic MW2 maps, so like the original MW2, not fake MW2. They're coming to the MW3 release. There's also red dots. They're going to be on the mini map apparently, which is nice. And doors will be added, which is kind of the two good things, one bad. That COD loves to bring out, but doors will be a part of MW3 according to a leak. Your thoughts on MW3 being confirmed and the leaks and reports that are coming out about the maps and the features? Are you excited for MW3? I think I know the answer, but are you excited?
No, not really. This is the least excited I've been for a Call of Duty release in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that way last year, and I feel even less excited about this upcoming game, which is really weird for me to say, but even when there was the news dropping that they were confirming all the OG MW2 maps would be in this game, I really was just like, I wasn't excited. I had the idea in the back of my head they were going to probably try to do doors or something to change the map, so it wasn't going to really be the OG maps anyway. Um, but that aside, yeah, I just I don't know. I feel like you can look at it in multiple ways. Like, yeah, it's going to be really cool for old, longtime players like myself to be able to play on those, very nostalgic maps and stuff. But at the same time, it feels like, it it's almost, there's been so many reports over the last couple of years about there potentially not even being a technically full premium release or whatever for this year. Um, and the fact that they're technically remastering basically all old maps and not giving true new multiplayer maps, those kind of like make sense in unison, but it is still kind of wild to me that there's not going to be like an actual new 6v6 map. I think they said there's going to be like a couple ground war maps or something like that at launch.
Mhm.
But those won't be used for competitive, so that means literally at the start of the CDL year, um, we're basically going to be seeing all maps from the original Modern Warfare 2 being used in competitive, which, as long as the doors don't screw up things too much, that means we get to see Scrapyard, High Rise, Terminal, Skid Row, Karachi, maybe Rundown for S&D. It's a little big, so I don't know. Um, but yeah, there's so many things to take into consideration with that. There's a lot of good maps. Hopefully, changes don't really ruin anything too much from a competitive standpoint. But I was thinking about it earlier too, like a map like Scrapyard. That map was so like it's a good map, but it was really small back in the day, and you could kind of it's that traditional 3-lane map. But with like the new movement, there's rumors of I think they actually confirmed slide canceling is coming back with the height and movement and stuff. Like I don't know if Hardpoint would work on Scrapyard just because it's such a small map. And with the speed of the movement and stuff nowadays, like it would probably be a faster map than Bokage in my mind. So that's why I'm thinking a map like Rundown, which was, I hope you remember Rundown from
I
the
don't
old
know.
days. It had like the couple bridges, or it had 3 bridges on each side. And there was like a useless gas station in the back on one side. Um, and like an embassy on the other side that there was like domination points and stuff like that, but that was probably considered a bigger map in MW2 back in that day, but it might be more appropriate for this pacing if the movement is more like what we've seen over the last couple of years. So it could be interesting that we'll have MW2 maps, but it could technically be a different map pool depending on what games are played for the modes. Obviously, the biggest difference is because Hardpoint wasn't around for the original MW2, finding the maps that work for Hardpoint will be interesting. I would love to see Capture the Flag come back because I remember playing Capture the Flag on Rundown in pubs, and that was fun. But then you have maps like Wasteland, which Wasteland is really known for like the noob tube, one-man armies just flying across the map and stuff like that. And I don't think Wasteland would work in competitive nowadays, but some of these maps just have that nostalgia where the players might be willing to try some stuff out at the beginning of the game. Um, and it might come down to the fact that because these maps, again, assuming they don't make major drastic changes to the maps, most of the longtime pros will have played these games. And now saying that, there is a a lot of newer pros in the league who might not have been playing COD back in 2009, 2010. So um, I guess there's a lot to consider with all this news. Um, I am kind of excited though. I do have to say for just the thoughts of playing the maps. Like I was talking to head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor earlier today about Terminal, and I was showing him an old GB video from 9 years ago. One of the spots I used on that map in S&D clutch. So that is a little exciting, I gotta admit. But yeah, I definitely am holding back my expectations, and we'll have to see what we get come launch day, which I believe has been confirmed for November 10th.
I believe so. Yeah. Um. Yeah. I agree with a lot of what you said. To be honest, I'm not nostalgic about MW2 because that's before when I started playing COD. Like I actually have played MW2, but I went back and played it after I got into COD. So I started playing consistently in BO2. Like I've said this many times, but I started playing in BO2 and then I went back to I played Black Ops 1 campaign, but I didn't know anything about competitive when I had played it originally. And I played the campaign of MW2 and MW3, but again, didn't know what competitive was until Black Ops 2. And then I went back and played some of the competitive stuff for MW2 and MW3. I hated it, but that's just like, obviously, I liked Black Ops 2, and that is a pretty different game from what was COD back in, what was that, 2008, 2009, or whatever, when MW2 was coming out. So, I'm not nostalgic at all about MW2 or MW3. Same with COD 4 when they did Modern Warfare Remastered a few years ago. I did end up playing it, and some of it's fun, but again, I don't have like the rose tinted glasses that a lot of people do about some of these games and some of these maps. So it'll be fun, I guess, if there is an MW2 map that's really good for modern competitive, and I'll end up I'll watch any of it, but maybe I'll end up liking a few. And of course, I'll be playing this game more than I have for the past few years. So I guess I'll have more of an opinion once it actually comes out, or once we really get the beta. That'll be really when I get to get to play the game and get to see what the maps are all about. But when you said, if the doors aren't too much of an issue and cause a lot of issues with the new map or the old maps, and I was just like, in my head, like, that is a gigantic if, because we've seen it in every game that the doors just make it changes so much about how COD works, and especially with slide canceling. It's just gonna be it's gonna be just a wreck that we're gonna be along the ride for. It just I'm pretty disappointed in COD in general, just because I think it's really lazy to not put a single new map in a game that you're releasing and you're charging $60-$70 for. I think that's just really, really lazy. And I think it really just came down to, and they can probably deny this, but I don't think that this entire time they were planning on releasing MW3 as a standalone game, and that this was going to be this was the plan all along. I personally think this is just an expansion of MW2. That's how I view it, and they might improve things, but they improve things in updates too. Like, this is just a big update that they're going to make to MW2. They're going to charge $60-$70 for it, and that's just how it's going to be. A lot of what their marketing is for this game is that we fixed something we broke in MW2. It's better in MW3, but they broke it in MW2. So like I don't get any satisfaction out of that. So like red dots coming back, that doesn't make me happy about COD, because that's something they did. Like, if I break Bink's leg and then I fix it and I say, "But look, I fixed your leg," Bink should still be upset at me that I broke his leg in the first place. And MW3 is, as much as they want to, I'm sure they will market it as kind of a return to glory, because they're marketing it as also that this is the first like direct sequel, like back-to-back years sequel, and maybe they'll push the campaign, and they're marketing Makarov coming back because he was obviously like the main villain in MW3. I do remember that. I'm not going to play the campaign probably, but I remember it back in the day that I was a really big fan. But it's just, times have changed so much since the first MW3 came out. I think that was 2011 that it released. So it's been 12 years, or it will be 12 years by the time that the game releases. And I just don't have any time for the hype up about COD anymore, because it's just not good anymore. Like, and I'm not saying that competitive's not good, because I have a lot of fun watching competitive. The CDL is always a lot of fun, because watching the best players play at their best against each other, that's fun. Like, when there's hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, and you know that this can be like a gigantic boost to someone's legacy to win a world championship or to win an event, that's fun. I get a lot of satisfaction out of watching those events. But as far as like the hype machine goes for COD, I think myself and I do think other people, probably not like the mass, the all of the people that buy these CODs every year. I don't think that a lot of people care necessarily about that stuff, but you and I are some of the bigger COD fans in competitive at least, and obviously you played much longer than I have and more consistently than I have over the past few years. But I don't think either one of us are particularly excited for the next COD. Maybe for the next Treyarch, but I'm not really like Infinity Ward and Sledgehammer just beat me down year after year, and then Treyarch hopefully tries to bring me back up, but at some point they're just kind of like not gonna get me back up. I didn't even buy Cold War a few years ago, so it's already kind of happened to an extent. Enough of my ranting, though.
There is a pretty big change at Treyarch that could even put a little bit of a damper on that upcoming release. But yeah, I mean, even for someone like me, I'm really excited about zombies, and especially the next Treyarch zombies, which apparently Treyarch will be working on the zombies in MW3, but it's going to be more of a PvP experience reportedly, which obviously you just said you didn't play. Cold War, but in Cold War there was an outbreak mode, which was essentially like a DMZ version of zombies. At that point there were like, it was like missions in zombies instead of just your round based zombies where you're trying to make it to round 30, 40, 50. You had like a mission to protect a reactor from a shit ton of zombies or something like that. It wasn't really my style, but we'll have to see what happens with the zombies this year. But I'm holding my breath for the Treyarch, especially after the news, which we can talk about, even right now, whenever you're ready to move on to the subject. But definitely, I mean, that Treyarch next game could be make or break for the franchise as a whole.
Yeah, David Vonderhaar, which is the next bit of news, really the last one that we have. Vonderhaar, who's really just been like the face of Treyarch for really the last like 15 years, or like since Black Ops has really blown up, and he's definitely been the face of the Black Ops franchise since I've been a fan, and he's been like a game designer and design director, so a lot of different titles, I guess. But he's officially leaving Treyarch and starting his own project or doing something else that he can't talk about yet. But Vonderhaar leaving is, I guess, in a symbolic way, it means a lot because he is, like I said, the face. He's the most like forward-facing person in Treyarch in the last 10 years, and him leaving, I guess, just symbolically shows that they're moving on. They're moving in a different direction. Things are changing, at least internally in Treyarch, and but I said it before the show started. I didn't even know what Vonderhaar did, and I still don't. I know that he has like the titles and everything, but I mostly saw him when he would do like E3 or whatever reveal was coming up. And that's really the only time I saw him, and he might tweet something about the last time I remember seeing his tweet was him complaining about COD pros complaining about the game, when I have no time for developers and designers to complain about other people complaining. So that's really the last time I saw him on social media. I don't know if he's been doing other stuff, but what are your thoughts, obviously, because you are a big Treyarch guy. You love zombies, and Treyarch is known for zombies. That's really like their calling card every game that they have, at least. They typically do it very, very well. So what are your thoughts on Vonderhaar leaving Treyarch?
Yeah, I think like you put it pretty well that it is a signal of bigger changes to come, and it will be interesting to see how his departure affects the upcoming release from Treyarch whenever that next Treyarch title of the franchise is officially released, which is hopefully and seemingly coming next year, but we'll have to wait for official confirmation on that. But yeah, like I'm pretty sure he said 18 years he spent 18 years at Treyarch, and known for a lot of the Black Ops games, like you mentioned, but obviously with 18 years, that dates even before that, and to some of the original COD titles before the Black Ops series. So he's been around for a long time, and we might not know exactly what he was doing in recent years, but he really was a very public face for the franchise and the Treyarch titles in particular during the cycle. And like you said, when they were previewing games, and he seemed to be receptive, and the perception I get from hearing the pros talk about working with devs is I feel like I heard a lot of them say that they liked working with Vonderhaar and trying to improve the game as much as possible and make necessary tweaks, all that stuff. So I guess thank you, Vonderhaar, for everything you did while you were involved with the franchise. Wishing you the best going forward, and if whatever his new project is some kind of shooter game or whatnot, I most likely will have to give that a shot whenever it becomes available. But again, we don't know anything about what the next project is for him, or even if it is a game or whatnot. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, according to this this Wikipedia page, he started working for Call of Duty during Call of Duty 2 Big Red Ones. So that was 2005, so 18 years, like you said. And really, like, he's I don't know, like it's so hard to pinpoint how much credit to give him specifically versus other people, but like if he's like Black Ops 2 specifically is kind of like, I don't want to say a revolutionary game, but it definitely like modernized Call of Duty as an esport, because MW3, I don't even think it had a LAN mode if I'm not mistaken, and that was kind of like the big hold up for MW3, and that was the first year that they did $1 million tournament, and then in Black Ops 2 that was the first year that they did a competitive $1 million tournament, because COD XP and MW3 was just kind of a pub hybrid, that it was more like a launch marketing ploy than what it ended up being was like the culmination of the season, or the culmination of a or like the peak of a season was the World Championship. And whether he deserves this much credit but or not, he's going to be like the guy that people think about when Treyarch is brought up, and competitive Call of Duty for Treyarch games is brought up, because I know Black Ops 2 is just a really big game for the history of competitive Call of Duty. That's kind of like the beginning of the modern era, or one of the eras, I guess, because we're probably in the CDL era now. But so like what you said, thanks to Vonderhaar for all of his hard work, and I hope the best for him. I hope that he does something that can push COD forward at the very least, or maybe get people to play his other game and maybe take COD. And I really hope just like he's kind of a wake up call for Call of Duty, but I think we're far past that point, personally. But that's just my opinion. I don't think that there was anything else. We covered SIB, the Minnesota RØKKR, Clayster's contract, MW3, Vonderhaar, and roster mania. So I think we've hit all of the topics that we planned on, and we're right around an hour at this moment in time, which is probably a good time to wrap up. Unless you have anything else, make sure to subscribe, like, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube as well. You can, whenever we're live, you can check out twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. Additionally, follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and at Ego Chall Podcast. I guess it's called X now, but we're still probably just going to call it Twitter anyway. And the next show to be determined. We're 2 weeks away from Labor Day weekend, so we probably won't be doing a podcast that week, and I will be on vacation as well that week as well. So we might do one next week, so we can kind of just have something out there. So because we'll be gone the following week anyway, but we'll if it shows up, and it shows up, like we'll do a show and it'll show up in your feed. If we don't, then that's just kind of how it goes. The off season's been really slow. This is like the real slow part. Maybe it'll speed up as we get into like September and October, especially because we'll be getting closer and closer to the release of MW3, and we'll get to the beta and all of that good stuff. But thank you guys for supporting us. So the YouTube video for the last podcast, so 2 weeks ago, I think that was our most viewed or maybe second most viewed YouTube video ever, which was incredible. I've literally no idea why this happens every time that it does. I always bring it up to Bink, and he's just like, "What do you know what happened?" He said that a few times, and I'm like, "No, I don't know." Like I've looked on Reddit, I've looked on these other sites that I'm like, maybe people are linking out to our podcast, but I don't know. Maybe they're just the algorithm blesses us periodically, and that's just how it goes. But again, thank you for all your support. Hopefully, as the off season kind of not dies down, but gets into the end part, the end game of the off season, we can do more regular podcasts and we have more to talk about, because even we had 2 weeks of build up here and we just hit an hour, and it didn't feel like we were stretching it too long. Yeah, thank you guys for everything, and Bink, take it away.
Yeah, I don't got much to add on to that. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. We'll see you the next time we're here, whenever that may be. And as always, remember to send the chow.